Clara Wells tightened the worn straps of her gardening gloves as she stepped through the wrought iron gates of the Central Botanical Garden. The morning sun illuminated the manicured hedges, ornate fountains, and the delicate flower beds, but beyond the beauty lay an air of exclusivity. This garden was more than a public park, it was a stage for the city's elite. Clara, dressed in her faded green uniform and sturdy boots, moved quietly along the gravel paths, blending into the background as she prepared for her day's work. She nodded politely to the well-dressed patrons gathered near the new art installation. Julian Marchand, the celebrated sculptor, stood proud beside his latest creation, a delicate arrangement of handcrafted glass flowers perched on twisting bronze stems, nestled amid bright blossoms. Curators and guests sipped champagne, their soft laughter punctuating discussions of art and money. Clara felt the eyes glance past her, weighing her simple attire against the crowd's polished elegance. But she kept her gaze low and hands busy, tending to hedges and clearing stray leaves to avoid disrupting the grand atmosphere. Suddenly, a sharp gasp sliced through the hum of conversation. A woman's voice trembled, "The sculpture, it's broken." Heads turned to the centerpiece, where shattered glass glittered cruelly on the grass. Julian's smile vanished. His urgent eyes found Clara near the scene. "Did you do this?" His tone was sharp, laden with accusation. Whispers rippled through the crowd. "Careless, clumsy, out of place," murmured voices. Garden staff approached, and a manager stepped forward. "Clara Wells, you need to come with me." The humiliation burned as she was pulled aside, the weight of judging glances sinking her heart. Clara left the garden grounds, clutching her tools, her steps heavy but her mind certain, she was innocent. The front door of Clara's modest apartment creaked softly as she pushed it open, the faint scent of damp earth trailing in behind her. She dropped her worn gloves on the kitchen table and sank into the faded chair by the window. The city skyline stretched beyond the cracked glass, but Clara's gaze remained fixed on the peeling paint of the walls. The events at the garden replayed relentlessly in her mind, the murmurs, the pointed fingers, the coldness in Julian Marchand's voice. A knot formed deep in her chest, tightening with each breath. She felt hollow, stripped of the dignity that had carried her through years of hardship. Dinner sat untouched on the stovetop, the aroma of stewed vegetables and herbs mingling with the sterile chill of the room. Clara found no appetite. Instead, she turned to the worn photographs pinned above her small nightstand, tracing familiar faces and places as if seeking comfort from ghosts of a past that felt both distant and painfully close. She remembered herself from not long ago, bright-eyed and hopeful, a young woman with dreams larger than the cramped apartment she called home. At 19, Clara had been a top horticulture student, thriving in her classes with a natural ease that astonished her teachers. She had imagined a life surrounded by plants, cultivating beauty and growth as her profession, but fate had other plans. Her mother's illness arrived like a storm that left destruction in its wake. Diagnosed with a progressive heart condition, her mother needed constant care. Clara had dropped out of school to tend to her, balancing caregiving with part-time jobs that barely paid the bills. Nights blurred into days, punctuated by hospital visits and whispered reassurances. She watched as the woman who had nurtured her withering now, and though she persisted, the weight was exhausting. Those years shaped Clara, molding resilience into a quiet determination. After her mother passed, Clara pushed forward with the steely resolve born from hardship, taking any work that paid enough to keep her small world afloat. She had tended community gardens, cleaned flower beds in neighborhood parks, and accepted odd jobs wherever she could find them. Her love for plants never dimmed, but her dreams felt more fragile with each passing year. Landing the groundskeeper position at the botanical garden had been a victory. It wasn't a career promotion or a chance to heal the earth on a grand scale, but to Clara, it was a foothold, a step toward reclaiming purpose. She had arrived early each day, ritualistically caring for every petal and leaf as if they were extensions of her own hopes. The garden, with its hidden corners and secret blooms, had become a place where she felt grounded and visible in the best way. Now, the sting of public accusation threatened to undo it all. Whispers of incompetence and suspicion had seeped through the carefully maintained walls, poisoning the respect she had quietly earned. The weight of unjust blame felt suffocating, and the thought of losing this job, a job she had fought so hard to hold on to, left her trembling. Clara rose slowly, moving to the small sink where sunlight tried to warm the cold tiles. She pressed her hands under running water, letting the cool stream soothe her flushed face. The room fell into silence except for the distant sounds of city life leaking through the cracked window. Alone, she allowed herself a moment to feel the raw ache beneath the surface, the exhaustion, the humiliation, the quiet rage at being so easily discarded. She recalled the afternoon spent hours ago, the sharp crack of broken glass and Julian's accusing glare fixated on her as if she were the only possible culprit. The accusations had come fast and heavy, fueled not by proof but by assumption. Clara had remained silent, knowing words wouldn't sway the crowd's prejudice built on class and appearance. Her mind drifted to the patrons at the garden, their effortless wealth, their polished manners, their certainty that Clara was beneath them. She had watched their eyes slip coldly over her simple uniform, dismissing her presence as invisible or worse, a risk. The thought made her stomach twist. She, who had come humbly, with nothing but respect for the place and love for her work, was now viewed as a threat. Yet even amidst despair, a quiet ember flickered. Clara knew she hadn't damaged the sculpture. Her routine was careful, methodical, her hands steady and precise. Something else had happened, a detail overlooked by those caught in the moment of outrage. But what? Regret gnawed at her, not over the accident, which she was sure she hadn't caused, but over the years lost chasing a dream now interrupted by suspicion. The future she'd barely begun to build seemed uncertain and fragile, its edges blurred by doubt. Her phone buzzed softly on the table, a message from Miguel, the security guard who sometimes offered a kind word or a shared smile during her shifts. She hadn't replied, too weary to engage, but his gesture lingered in her mind like a small lifeline. Perhaps not everyone saw her as merely a background figure. Clara glanced once more at the photos on the wall, a young woman in overalls kneeling beside a bed of bright marigolds, an arm wrapped protectively around her mother, a faint smile touching her lips despite the struggle. Those images reminded her of who she was beneath the grime of low wages and societal scorn. A woman who cared fiercely, who had sacrificed much, who refused to vanish quietly. As evening turned to night, Clara settled into her chair near the window, the glow of streetlights casting long shadows across the room. The city moved on outside, oblivious to the storm within her small sanctuary. She closed her eyes, summoning the strength she needed to rise again, to face a world that judged too quickly and doubted the simple truth. Determined, Clara whispered to the quiet night, a promise to herself, she would find the answer. She would prove her worth, not for their approval, but to reclaim the piece of her soul that belonged in that garden among the blossoms and glass petals. Tomorrow, she told herself, would be the day she began. The memory struck Clara with startling clarity as she sat in her small kitchen, the dim glow from the single overhead bulb casting soft shadows around the room. She replayed the morning of the incident in her mind, sifting through the fragments she could recall from the busy preparations at the botanical garden. It wasn't until she remembered a brief exchange she'd overheard between two event workers on the far side of the installation that a faint thread of possibility emerged, a thread that unraveled some of the certainty the accusing eyes had fixated on her. One of the workers had joked that a glass of champagne had tipped over near the sculpture just moments before the unveiling. Clara remembered glancing toward the installation then, but she'd been across the garden tending to a hedge. The timing didn't align with her whereabouts or duties, and the spilled drink could have caused the delicate glass petals to weaken or fall. The idea lit a candle in the dark, and with it, a quiet determination blossomed. Clara took a deep breath and dialed the garden management's office, her fingers trembling slightly as they pressed the buttons. When the manager answered, her voice was clipped, unsurprised by the call. "Good afternoon, Ms. Wells. What can I do for you?" the manager asked, already guarded. "I wanted to discuss the sculpture incident," Clara began, trying to keep her tone calm and respectful. "There's something I think you might want to know, something I overheard that suggests the damage may not have been my fault." A sigh from the other end. "Ms. Wells, with all due respect, the decision has been made. There's no reversing it or reinvestigating. I'm afraid we can't accommodate any further discussion." Clara swallowed the disappointment. "Please, could I at least speak with security about reviewing the footage from that morning? I believe it could clear up some questions." Pause. "Security footage is confidential. It's not something we release lightly." "I understand, but if you saw the video, I think you'd see what I mean." Clara's voice was steady, but edged with urgency. The line went silent for a moment before the manager said, "I will see what I can do, but no promises." Clara hung up, feeling both hope and frustration. If only she could see the footage herself. She knew she needed another approach, someone who could help her access the security room or at the very least, offer a glimpse of those surveillance videos. The next day, against the faint protest of fatigue gnawing at her, Clara returned to the garden. She walked the familiar pathways once again, avoiding the glances that still carried the weight of suspicion. Her gaze met Miguel, the security guard she'd noticed before, a steady presence, always polite, quietly observing the bustle of the garden's visitors. Though cautious, Miguel had once given her a reassuring nod that day, a small gesture that had lingered in her mind. Taking a breath, Clara approached the security office where Miguel was stationed, his dark uniform neat, his expression open but measured. "Hi Miguel," she said softly. "I was wondering if I could talk to you for a moment." Miguel looked up, a faint smile crossing his face. "Of course, Clara. What's on your mind?" Clara explained briefly and honestly about her suspicions related to the spilled drink and her need to clear her name. She avoided blame, focusing instead on the facts and her desire for clarity. Miguel listened carefully, nodding along. "Let me see what I can do," he said after a moment. "I don't usually share footage, but I know you've been working hard here. It's not fair to be treated like this without proof." That afternoon, with a discreet nod and a whispered assurance, Miguel handed Clara a small USB drive. "This is from the morning of the event. Just take a look. But be careful, this kind of thing isn't supposed to leave the office." Clara's heart pounded as she returned to her apartment and plugged the drive into her laptop. The video was grainy, the camera angle slightly obstructed by foliage, but her eyes hunted for the sculpture's area. Minutes passed as she fast-forwarded, holding her breath. Then she saw it. A tall man in a crisp suit, obviously part of the event management team, paced nervously near the art piece. He held a glass of champagne, and as he stepped closer to the sculpture, his elbow brushed against one of the glass flowers. The delicate petals wobbled precariously. He pulled back hastily, glancing around to see if anyone noticed. Then, as the man turned, his foot caught on a garden hose coiled at the edge of the path. He stumbled briefly, and the glass arrangement teetered again, some petals breaking against the grass. The man bent down hurriedly to check, muttering under his breath. Clara's chest tightened as she realized this explained the damage Julian had found so devastating. It wasn't her fault at all. Still scanning, Clara's gaze caught something else on her phone, a faint notification. She opened Instagram and searched for hashtags related to the event, scanning posts from guests. There, She found a short video snippet by a garden visitor, showing a heated exchange between Julian Marchand and a man fitting the same description from the footage. Julian's voice was low, angry, accusing the man for carelessness in front of a small group. The man looked flustered, attempting to deflect blame. The social media post was subtle but undeniable, a confirmation that the damage had been accidental and caused by someone with far more status than Clara. Her name was never mentioned. She was not part of this secret conversation. With mounting hope, Clara felt a surge of courage. She had the proof she needed, both the security footage and the video from the visitor. Now the challenge was what to do with it. She sat back in her chair, the tension in her shoulders easing slightly. The battle wasn't over, but the truth was finally within reach. She would have to tread carefully. This garden, this crowd, thrived on appearances and invisible hierarchies. She knew that many would prefer to harden their judgment rather than accept fault. But Clara wasn't willing to let a baseless accusation define her. Not this time. Quietly, resolutely, she prepared herself for a confrontation that wasn't loud or angry, one that would speak through undeniable evidence and steady resolve. The truth would have its moment. And Clara Wells was ready to claim it. The invitation arrived unexpectedly, slipped under Clara's door in a slender envelope embossed with the Botanical Gardens emblem. It was an invite to the Gardens Gala, the same event where Julian Marchand was to unveil his latest installation, a follow-up to the one that had been so brutally broken. The irony wasn't lost on Clara, but neither was the opportunity. If she was going to clear her name, she needed to be present, and this event was the perfect stage. On the evening of the gala, Clara's modest dress was a quiet contrast to the sea of elegant gowns and tailored suits flooding the garden's grand pavilion. Crisp white tents draped with ivy held clusters of guests, and soft lighting cast a golden glow over silver trays piled with hors d'oeuvres and flutes of sparkling wine. The air was thick with conversations, laughter, and the subtle hum of prestige. Clara moved through the crowd, a quiet figure with purpose hidden behind her composed expression. She carried with her the USB drive and the phone where she had saved the visitor's video, proof that could shatter the carefully constructed story blaming her for the damage. She knew the risk. This was their world, and she was still the outsider, the humble groundskeeper no one expected to speak up. First, she sought out a handful of the garden's staff, whispering her findings to a few trusted employees who had always treated her with kindness despite the gossip. Faces she recognized from her days tending plants, some discreetly nodding, others' eyes widening in surprise. They promised discretion but urged caution. Her next aim was a journalist she'd met once during a planting ceremony months before, a woman named Elise Harper, known for her sharp eye and fair reporting. They hadn't spoken much since, but Clara slipped Elise a note during a pause in the crowd, asking if she would be willing to hear something important. Elise's expression shifted from polite curiosity to solemn understanding. Meanwhile, murmurs around the pavilion began to subtly shift. A whisper cascaded from table to table, snippets of doubt about the original accusation weaving through the polished voices. Some guests mentioned a strange incident they'd glimpsed during the setup, others referenced a brief scuffle near the sculpture, details that hadn't surfaced publicly until now. Clara watched quietly as the energy in the room began to rebuild itself. When the moment came for Julian Marchand to speak, a hush settled over the crowd. The artist's usual confidence was tinged with unease as he addressed the guests. Before he could proceed, Elise took the floor, flashing a small device and projecting the security footage on a large screen. The grainy video played, revealing the event organizer's clumsy stumble, the spilled champagne, the accidental bump to the glass petals. Gasps rippled through the audience. Elise then played the visitor's short video showing Julian's angry confrontation, confirming the truth behind the accident. The shift was palpable. Julian's eyes found Clara across the room, a flicker of embarrassment and perhaps regret crossing his features. Those who had once whispered disparaging comments now looked away, faces tightening with discomfort. The man responsible for the accident was sitting at a central table, a prominent figure among the city's elite. The spotlight suddenly felt scorching. His confident composure unraveled as he felt the crowd's shifting gaze settle on him. He cast uneasy glances around the room, awareness dawning that the secret was no longer his to command. By the time the footage ended, whispers had grown into murmurs of surprise and shifting loyalties. The crowd's narrative adjusted. Clara was no longer the accused but the unwitting victim of circumstance. Some guests approached Clara cautiously, offering tentative apologies or nodding in recognition of her courage. The cruelty of earlier judgments felt small against this new wave of respect, though Clara remained composed, her heart steady but her emotions a quiet storm. Julian moved through the crowd and approached her. His voice was low and sincere as he spoke. "Clara, I owe you an apology. I was swift to condemn without cause. Thank you for standing firm with the truth." Clara accepted the apology, her expression soft but resolute. "I only wanted to be heard. That anyone would believe otherwise, it hurt. But I'm glad the truth is seen now." Julian nodded, a shadow of humility in his eyes. "If you're willing, I'd like to work with you on caring for my future installations. You know these gardens better than anyone." The offer surprised Clara but felt earned, not given as charity. She nodded carefully, sensing a friendship as well as a professional collaboration in that moment. As the crowd's attention moved on, the man who had caused the accident made a discreet but hurried exit, avoiding the now prickling stares and cold acknowledgments. His position seemed suddenly precarious, and the whispers suggested consequences were unavoidable. Clara stepped back to one side, the sounds of the gala washing over her in a new light. She breathed deeply, the tension that had held her like a cage loosening. Tonight, the crowded garden no longer felt like a place that rejected her. The silence and glances that had once shrunk her were replaced by acknowledgement and a quiet respect that warmed her spirit. Clara Wells stood not just as a groundskeeper, but as someone who had reclaimed her story in a place that had tried to deny it. Her presence was no longer invisible, and her strength no longer overlooked. The days following the gala unfolded like a slow awakening for Clara. The echoes of the evening's revelations rippled through the botanical garden's corridors, bringing change that Clara had long hoped for but never dared expect. The event organizer, the man whose careless stumble had shattered Julian Marchand's prized glass flowers, was swiftly suspended from all upcoming duties. The garden management announced the decision quietly but firmly, a clear message that negligence would not be tolerated, regardless of status or connections. Clara received a formal letter from the garden's director, extending a sincere apology for the mishandling of the situation. The words conveyed regret over the rush to judgment and promised a renewed commitment to fairness. The letter also included an unexpected offer, a promotion to assistant groundskeeper. It was more than a change in title, it was an acknowledgement of Clara's hard work, integrity, and the unjust treatment she had endured. Her heart fluttered with cautious hope as she read and reread the letter, realizing that her perseverance had not been in vain. This was tangible justice, recognition that came not as charity, but as earned respect. A few days later, Julian Marchand approached her during a routine afternoon at the garden. His usual confident demeanor held a hint of warmth that wasn't there before. "Clara," he began, "I'd like to thank you properly. Not just for standing by the truth, but for your care of the gardens. I'm planning a new series of installations, and this time, I want you to be involved from the start. Your knowledge and dedication would be invaluable." Clara looked up, surprise mingling with gratitude. "I'd be honored," she said simply, feeling the weight of opportunity settle over her. This collaboration wasn't just a professional step, it symbolized the transformation of her place within the garden, and among the community she had long felt alienated from. Garden management's attempts to smooth over their earlier dismissal followed soon after. The director invited Clara to a private meeting, offering further apologies and even suggesting opportunities for training and additional responsibilities. Clara listened politely, appreciating the effort but keenly aware that actions mattered more than words. When asked if she would consider returning immediately to her former duties, Clara smiled gently. "I value the offer," she said, "but I'll return on my terms, with the respect I've earned, and with a commitment to move forward." The garden's atmosphere shifted noticeably as Clara resumed her work with renewed confidence. Staff and patrons alike regarded her differently. The once dismissive glances transformed into nods of acknowledgement and occasional greetings. It was a subtle but meaningful validation, reinforcing that her presence was no longer questioned but appreciated. One afternoon, as Clara walked the winding paths tending to a bed of bright marigolds, she caught sight of Miguel, the security guard who had discreetly aided her with the footage. He smiled warmly and gave a small thumbs up, a silent gesture of solidarity and friendship that moved her more than words could express. The community that once had viewed her as an outsider seemed to accept her in a way that transcended social divides. And Clara, once weighed down by silence and shame, now held her head high. She reflected on everything: the long years of sacrifice caring for her mother, the loss of a dream interrupted, the quiet resilience that had carried her through. The accusations, the humiliation, the fight, all had forged something new. A woman acknowledged not just for the simplicity of her role but for the strength and integrity she embodied. On a crisp morning, Clara stepped out of the garden office after a planning meeting with Julian, her footsteps steady on the gravel paths. The sun filtered through the leaves, casting dappled patterns across the flowers. Her uniform, while still humble, bore the new insignia of assistant groundskeeper, a symbol of her journey. As she passed groups of visitors, she noticed the difference: the smiles that greeted her, the subtle shifts in posture and tone. She belonged here, not as a background presence, but as a valued part of the garden's living story. Clara paused for a moment, inhaling the scent of earth and blossoms, scents that had been constant companions through her trials. A quiet smile tugged at her lips. The simple groundskeeper who had once been dismissed and humiliated was no longer invisible. She had reclaimed her place, standing tall and respected. With a steady step forward, Clara Wells walked on, the garden alive around her, a place that reflected not just nature's beauty, but the undeniable strength of her spirit.